Okay. Trying to get all my various screens organized here. There we are. Hey, Candace.
Hi.
We'll give it just another minute and then we'll get started. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Hi, Beth.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. Just great.
Hi, everyone. I have a Diet Coke emergency, so I am going to go grab my Diet Coke out of the fridge really, really quickly. But it's so great to see all of your smiling faces.
You have to do it. I'm 100% in support of that.
Thank you, Beth. I feel like
100%.
that was you seconding the motion.
It
So,
was. It really
okay,
was.
I'll be right back, I promise.
Okay.
Can everyone see a transcript running along the side of the screen because I turned on the recording? It's like okay, it's just me then as the recorder. It's very distracting, so I'm gonna close it.
Yeah,
It's
we
like a
can't see
running.
it. I don't
Okay,
think.
Oh, I
good. It's
can
like
see it now. You can turn it on if you need to.
I'm good. It
Oh,
was quite distracting if others are interested. Okay. Can everyone see my shared screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
I will say as we get started, I was originally going to kind of do this a little bit more informally, but I was anxious about missing something, and I always enjoy a PowerPoint. So I was putting this together and I realized I had no idea if I'm new, right? So I had no idea if IHCDA has PowerPoint requirements. And so I figured, Kristen, I would ask for forgiveness.
You can definitely have forgiveness because
Thank
there
you.
is a PowerPoint.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there is. I was like, I don't have time to figure out where that is. I'm just making my own.
I
It's
don't
nice.
adhere to it
It's
if
nice
I
to have
can.
the we were very strict about that in my past life. So it's nice to have the freedom to, explore what PowerPoint can do all on its own.
At Purdue, we have two choices, and they're both just as boring as you can imagine.
It's sad too because PowerPoint like has the design feature now where you don't even have to be good at PowerPoint. You just hit that button and it does magic for you. It's like, oh, I don't need to be able to be a graphic designer. It just does it for me. Okay. Well, we've got a great crew here, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to minimize your faces so that I can make sure I have my notes in my screen and stuff. If you want to go off camera, you can. I think I mentioned this is recorded, so if you prefer not to be on screen, I understand. But otherwise, we'll go through and if one of my colleagues wouldn't mind just keeping an eye on the chat, we can, I'll go by, when we go by sections, we'll address any questions as we go. Okay, thanks, Liz. All right, so what I hope we get out of our time together today, what I hope our outcomes are from today. I hope that at the end of this discussion, you feel like you understand the purpose of the IRPA and its role within the COC program competition. I am going to be kind of treating this very base level, because I really don't know everyone's exposure to the internal renewal program application, or IRPA. Nor do I know everyone's knowledge or experience with the continuum of care program. So I'm not going to go over everything, but I am going to make an assumption that we've got a broad range of knowledge base that we're starting with in order to kind of cover what seems to be most essential. But feel free, if you need further clarification, to ask for that, and we can dive into a couple things if we need to. I want you to feel knowledgeable about the scoring factors, the application requirements and application threshold. You'll see it within the application when we take a look at that, and also within the score sheet. All of this is broken out into sections, and you are able to provide notes and comments on things if there's inconsistencies. But really want to make sure you understand what those scoring factors are, a little bit of rationale for why they're there, the application thresholds, and why we have to have folks meet those too. Hopefully, folks come out of this feeling confident and prepared to score the applications that you're assigned. I definitely understand. I'm sure the rest of our team understands that, again, everybody's coming at this with a different knowledge base. So if, as you start getting into applications and you start feeling overwhelmed in some way, please reach out. I don't want this to be a source of stress for anyone. But for the most part, I really feel like the scoring criteria is it's fairly neutral. Either the information is there or it's not. So hopefully you're not feeling pressure to try and, come up with rationales or anything like that for any scores. Um, to also identify when applications require additional review. So we're fortunate in that, many of you step forward to assist in review, and that will really allow our team to have capacity to take a deeper look at things when you are finding if there is a problem with an application. It's not to say that we wouldn't still want you to just go ahead and finish scoring that application, but to draw it to our attention so that if there is something, we're able to take a look at it and make sure that we're on the same page as we firm up that score and present that as a part of the renewal project scores. And then make sure that you know when we'd like to have this back from you, the deadline for scoring, and where you should submit those score sheets, which is very simple, not complicated. And if we are thinking that we need more time than what's provided, I'd be happy to talk about that too. Any questions as we dive in? Okay, I can't see your faces, so in lieu of faces, I will assume we're okay.
No questions.
All right, thanks. Okay, so what is the internal renewal program application, or IRPA? First, this is a part of the continuum of care program funding. In order for funded agencies or funded subrecipients to receive their renewal of their funding, they need to complete the IRPA. These are all projects that have received funding before, and so they are renewing the funding that they get within the continuum of care program. It is a requirement for renewals after their first full year of operations. So we do have we ask everybody to submit, but we know that there will be deficiencies with applications if the people have not operated for a year. So we don't score those fully. The expectation for that full year of operation is really to allow folks not only to expend funds, to the fullest extent that they could, which is a big part of their scoring, is whether or not they're expending their funding, but also, to have their data be in a place where they've actually been able to serve the clients that they planned on serving. Some of you who are in direct service know that you may have every intention of getting started within 3 months of your start date on your contract and have that program full. But, in the real world, it can take much longer than that. And so we really want to give people that chance to have the grace of that first year and then start having them, complete and score this IRPA for them. It utilizes both the threshold set from HUD and from IHCDA to say these are minimum expectations for you, as well as performance-based scoring on certain criteria from a report called the Annual Performance Report, which is a report that we submit to HUD, and that data is actually used, nationally to report on various things too. So these the APR data is always something that is a little bit of a challenge for projects because because very often they don't necessarily understand how their day-to-day data entry ties to what comes out in a report. And that's something that our HMIS team, really works hard to help prepare those folks to answer any questions. And it is one reason why we had to extend the deadline of the IRPA this year, because some folks, they get in and they don't realize that they have some data quality issues or some other things that could be impacting their APR. So when they go to enter their data and they see they have poor performance, in reality, it's usually poor data quality that's causing that. So this APR is really important. We ask projects to pay attention to it year round, and Grant and his team work really hard to make this a priority for them and support them in understanding APR and things like that. But it's definitely, you'll hear us throw that term around sometimes as an IHCDA staff, and it's a big part of what we're looking at and what HUD's looking at. And then finally, one thing that this also does is that if we've got projects that are, significantly challenged, if they're not spending, if we're finding deficiencies in their application, if they're not meeting thresholds, this is an opportunity for the Funding and Resource Committee, for the board itself, to, ask projects to go on a performance improvement plan. And those have been pretty informal as far as I understand the past, and we can definitely talk, down the line with the Funding and Resource Committee and internally at IHCDA how we might continue to provide that ongoing support. But this is, and beyond just having this application there, this is a really nice check-in for us, on things related to their performance, on items related to their spending. It gives us a nice overall picture of kind of what's happening with the subrecipient. So you won't be asked to identify whether or not somebody needs a performance improvement plan, but the information you provide in your score sheet will help, help the Funding and Resource Committee and the board make that kind of determination in the end. Any questions about what the IRPA is? Okay, so what are we here to do? We are here to understand how we score this thing, right? How we score and review what's going on with these projects and what's they've provided in their application. So IRPA scoring, the application itself is 100 points, which makes it really easy for percentages, right? But it does allow for up to 25 additional bonus points. And those bonus points are based upon how they engage with the continuum, trainings that they're doing, how compliant are they? Are they really consistent in their compliance with, funding expenditures and submission of reports and things like that? And then there's also some additional points in there for COVID-19 response. And while I wasn't a part of this process in the past, it makes a lot of sense that we're giving projects some additional grace and some opportunity to gain back some points, because having good outcomes during the time of COVID was really challenging. And as you'll see, as we dive into how the scoring is distributed, we do weight performance really heavily. And so giving people a chance to maybe earn back some points when they've had clients who really struggled through the pandemic is definitely a worthwhile pursuit for us as we, try and be fair, but also objective and firm in our criteria. There's also an opportunity for folks to have deductions on their applications. I did check today in the online form system we use called JotForm, and based upon the data that JotForm is providing, we did not have anybody that submitted later than 5 p.m. on June 22nd, which was when those applications were due. So hopefully you don't somehow notice that somebody's application was late in some way. You won't need to worry about deducting points for that. You can also have a deduction for substantially deficient applications, and we can talk more about what that would look like. And I definitely get some feedback from Kristen and other folks who have scored before about what we might be looking for. But I think there's some certain things that we definitely would say would cause somebody to be substantially deficient in their application, and we can provide some clear guidance on those particular situations for sure. And then all the projects must also meet the threshold requirements, and we'll talk about what those are. They're very clearly laid out in the application in their own section. And projects must score at least 65% of the top score for automatic renewal. Now, you won't know if somebody scored 65% of the top score, because even though, initially you might assume that would be, well, if anybody who scores a 65 would be for automatic renewal, but we could have projects that score 125, hypothetically, if you score all the points and then you get the bonus. Um, you could have somebody score that full amount. So don't worry about trying to determine if people have hit that threshold. When we get your data back in your score sheets, we'll be able to tabulate all of that and then provide that to Funding and Resource Committee so that they can, make that determination of who's hit that mark. So what is the process involved? What are you here to do as you review the IRPA? First, you're going to have your score sheet and your applications. You're going to record the scores in the score sheet. And then I'm going to provide this guidance in writing, but it'd be really helpful if we kind of named all of our score sheets the same so that they're very easy for us to organize on our side of things. But really it's just, the IRPA score sheet with the project name that's provided on the application itself. And again, will all be in writing too, but they'll just be really easy for us to organize in our files with those score sheets when we get them back from you if they're really all named the same. We are going to be looking at a few of the questions here that we're probably going to need folks to check APR data on calculations. And Jenna, you and I, if you wouldn't mind providing me some guidance on whether or not we think that's necessary for all questions or just some of them, I'd appreciate that. But we will give you instruction on how to do that in writing so you know specifically what you're looking at. But generally, we're hopeful that you won't need to do that in many cases. So we're not going to ask you to kind of dive into certain things. And it may be as we move this forward, if that is something that folks are just not able to do, we can talk about that. There's just been a few little tweaks inside the application that we had issue with, and we want to make sure we're scoring people fairly. And we'd prefer not to have only IHCDA staff kind of making that determination, but we understand if capacity is what it is that we may need to do that. So we are going to provide that data to you if we need to have something checked, but generally we're hoping that we can get through most of the application without having to do detailed checks on every question. We will have IHCDA staff make sure that the attachments that are required for the application are there and what they're supposed to be, but you will also see in the PDF that there are attachments there. And if you just happen, again, you'll see in the score sheet to note that there's nothing attached or, the names of the documents don't make sense. If they happen to have attached them separately, please just make a note of that so we can make sure we're double checking and catching on our end. And then again, the big thing that I think would probably contribute to a substantial deficiency would be if we were missing attachments entirely. So if there were, no attachments or we were missing attachments, we would be talking about whether or not that might require a substantial deficiency in an application. And again, all of that is when we go to look at the score sheet, you'll have a chance to see that and how you would be able to record that information if you thought there was a problem. And then we're going to have folks email score sheets back to us at our community services at ihcda.in.gov email. They'll make sure we've got one place where those score sheets are coming in, and that's a place that several of us on the team have access to. So that if somebody happens to be out, we're not, it's not all sitting in my email, for example, just in case there's any sort of problem. And then again, we are hopeful that we can get this done this month and that we could have these reviewed and back to us by July 22nd. And, having those sent to the community services email would be a huge help in making sure we keep track of all of those score sheets. All right. So the score sheet itself, I'll show you it in a second. Please use the score sheet that we provide you. I don't know where else you'd come up with one, but please use the one that we're going to give you. There is there's detailed instructions I will also be showing you at the end of today's presentation that give you real clear guidance on this should be a yes answer, this should be a no answer on things like our threshold questions. The score sheet does align with the application, and if there are any irregularities that we've noticed in the way people were interpreting wording or typos or things like that, we have made a note of that in the detailed instructions. So if you see something wonky, just check your detailed instructions to see if that was a question maybe people were misunderstanding or had an issue with. The applications themselves, and again, we'll show you one before we leave today, are a PDF of the exact question and their response. So it should be fairly easy for you to, kind of figure out when something's amiss, especially with those detailed instructions alongside of it. You can also use your score sheets to make notes about an application if you feel that's needed. Again, if you're looking at something and you feel like there's just a lot of problems with the application, making those notes down and then letting us know when you send it back that you think somebody else should take a look at the application would be really helpful. Just again, to make sure we've got fairness and objectivity, but we're also being, firm and diligent in checking that people are meeting the requirements of the application. Um, just so you know how the next step in this process works, we take the scores that are submitted on the score sheets and put them into a big master spreadsheet. And those scores then will inform the renewal ranking for projects. And projects are ranked based upon their performance. And then as we go through the no-fill process, we may have new projects that come on, things like that, that would impact, where stuff ends up fitting in the end. But, project performance is one of, if not the largest way we weight where somebody is ranked in the scoring. And the higher your project is ranked, the more likely you are to receive that renewal funding. Projects ranked at the bottom are not automatically not renewed, but they are, at higher risk potentially for not being funded in comparison with those who are ranking quite high. Well, we're going into our scoring guidance, but before I do that, I'm going to hop in, show you the score sheet. As I do that, please let me know if anybody has questions. I'm going to take that off and show you the score sheet. Any questions? I can't see you all, so I'm assuming nobody does. Okay. So this is the score sheet. Again, I had mentioned, it's pretty clear, grouped up into sections. Agency name, project name, all of that, whether or not they're a subrecipient or direct recipient from HUD, all of that's noted on the application. You'll be able to indicate by yes or no if somebody has met all of the requirements for renewal eligibility and federal requirements and all threshold requirements, and then if there were any notes there about why they were deficient in some way and not meeting those requirements. For clarification, I'll show you the detail score sheet here and you can see that. You'll see here we've highlighted they have to answer yes, they have to answer yes. In this case, they have to answer no. So you should be able to then just go through and say, okay, yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, and just know real quickly whether or not they've hit those requirements. I've highlighted stuff. Oh, that's the wrong date. I've highlighted stuff that is different because I think sometimes we think automatically, oh, to meet eligibility, they're saying yes to things. So when something is, a no instead of a yes, it's highlighted there to hopefully draw attention so there's less confusion about whether or not somebody's hit something. The scoring sections we're going to dive into here in a moment, and there's a lot of detail in the detailed instructions on what the scored sections are and what the thresholds are, or excuse me, the minimum numbers they need to get points and things like that. All right, before we dive into that, just one more time, opening space for questions in case it's needed. Okay, so our scoring guidance. So I just kind of showed you a little bit of that eligibility and threshold requirements. Um, the answers are yes, no. Applicants should be responding to each question. So if one of the things, again, you would notice right away is if people were skipping questions, the narrative portion at the end should explain if somebody had a yes when they should have had a no in order to meet eligibility or threshold, for example, or vice versa. They have space within their application to provide narrative to us about why that is. The types of things that we're looking for in there are just to explain, if they had, a deficiency in their audit, what were they doing to correct that? If they have had issues with, if they've had a finding or something like that, what have they been doing to make those corrections? If you if you see those answers are there, I think it's fine to say that they meet threshold as long as there's narrative at the bottom, and then you can just make a note, that there was narrative and things like that. If you're concerned about whether or not somebody's explanation is sufficient enough, again, just make that note and let us know as you give us your application back, and we can take a look at it just to make sure that, yeah, we're aware of that too, and yeah, they've explained kind of what's going on. So far in what I've reviewed, I haven't seen a whole lot of that, but there's 80 applications, so there I could have I haven't looked at all of them yet, and there's probably some of them that have narrative there. So the one thing I do just want to make sure we are doing for sure is that if somebody did skip a question, or if for example the in order to meet threshold, they needed to say yes or provide a rationale, and they say no, but then provide no rationale, for example. Please make a note of that in your notes and just say, that this was missing. They've have inconsistent answers. And again, that'll just cue us to have somebody take a second look at that application to make sure that they, did they not understand or there are real deficiencies there. The first set of criteria that are in the IRPA are questions about coordinated entry and something called housing first. And I am going to just very briefly touch on what that is before we move on. So coordinated entry is our coordinated system for folks who are needing permanent housing, who go through an assessment process where data is captured inside our homeless management information system, HMIS, and then that data is used to help determine what's the best fit of a housing resource for them, and then prioritize them for those resources. The coordinated entry questions in this IRPA are not about the completion of assessments or anything. It's really about, are they taking folks from that prioritization list? Are they ensuring that new people coming into their program are coming from coordinated entry? That's a HUD requirement and it's an IHCDA requirement. And as much as they're aligning with that, we want to make sure they are, and making sure we don't have what we call side doors into programs where people are coming from places that are not a part of coordinated entry. Housing first is a very strong expectation from HUD and a balance of state COC. And that's essentially the idea that we are removing barriers as much as possible to permanent housing. Housing first is, a core practice and best practice in homeless services across all parts of our system, not just permanent housing. And just, because I can get on my soapbox for a second, housing first is not housing only. And you'll see that in the questions as you review it, if you're reading them. I assume, you'll probably read the first couple before you just go, yes, no, yes, no. You'll see that the questions there are trying to get at whether or not projects are meeting clients where they are, supporting and actively engaging them to engage with services, but not requiring services or requiring sobriety or anything like that in order to engage with their housing program. So you'll see that in the responses there, and they could get up to 15 points for that. So each one of those housing first questions, there are 15 total, they're all worth 1 point in our application. When we dive into the performance measures section, so this is actually, I had it on here, there it is, it's 65 points. I was like, where is our point max? So this is obviously the most heavily weighted portion of the application. It focuses on the criteria listed here. So data quality means, are they entering HMIS data timely? Is it accurate? Do they have few errors in their data? And in particular, are they not missing data? At the very minimum, we don't want to have missing data on core data elements, like what we call universal data elements. We really need those universal data elements, and we need the data on the items that we're assessing through the APR in this application. So there's a question there about whether or not they have any missing data and what's that percent of data quality. There's then questions about permanent housing exits or whether or not people are remaining in permanent housing. And that's helping us understand, okay, as somebody is preparing to leave the program, are we helping transition them to a safe and permanent place? Or are we helping folks retain the housing they have within our program if they're going to stay? And that's really important for us, as obviously we know people who are vulnerable and that instability. And that's really what these housing programs are here for, is to end that instability and connect them to permanent housing. So exits to homelessness are unknown. That's an additional set of criteria related, kind of related to permanent housing, but really about, we know that people may have not exits to permanent housing, but in particular, we do not want them to disappear and have no idea where they went, and we really don't want them to become homeless again. So this is just another set of criteria, really reinforcing that we, as a system, as a balance of state, believe that, keeping folks in permanent housing and exiting them to a permanent or positive destination is the right thing to do. Adults who maintained or increased income, and this is a set of criteria just for folks who are the adults in the household. And it assesses whether or not they either got income from the time they started the program or they kept the income that they had. depending on, I'll just on my sidebar, depending on who's the presidential administration, this may or may not be as important to HUD. I've noticed that in my years, that sometimes the set of criteria is very important to the federal government and sometimes not so much. But we do know that many of our folks come in with zero income. They're not going to be able to keep their housing without some form of income, whether that's Social Security disability income, VA benefit income, something like that. And so this measure really gets at whether or not they're getting income or just maintaining what they have to keep, what they can in stability. Utilization rates of their units. So this is a point in time analysis 4 times a year of whether or not they have maintained folks in the number of units they planned to use as a part of their grant, and it really is just a cue within this process to say, are you filling those spots when they become open as quickly as possible? Are you able to, if you own the project yourself and operate the units yourself, are you turning over those units and getting people in again quickly? Or are you working quickly to, as you bring new people into the project, move people into a unit as quickly as possible? Finally, the last two, use of resources, which is really about, are we spending what we're supposed to be spending? And then finally, there's compliance with expenditure requirements. And this is the expectation either through IHCDA or with the HUD field office that they are submitting claims on their grant in a timely way. And obviously, those timely expenditures really indicate to us at IHCDA and to HUD too that you're spending your money, you're engaging clients, you're using the money for what you said you were going to use it for. So all good stuff that is, a part of what we're asked by HUD every year to assess it, and what we just, we as a COC have shown that we believe is important and value in if we're going to allocate this money out, these are the things we want to see. Any questions about these? And again, we'll dive into them in the uh, detail sheet in a moment, but just in case there are any before I hop over to the next section. Okay, so then we have our bonus points, and these are 4 categories. First is for training participation. Then there's a couple of questions about compliance. There's points for collaboration, and then there's points for COVID response. The criteria listed here, the first 3, training, compliance, and collaboration, pretty much you get it or you don't, as far as did you attend 4 things, 5 things, 2 things, 1 thing kind of thing. And there's a scaled level of points based upon participation or their level of compliance and collaboration. COVID-19 is a little bit more subjective, and it's not a perfect system that somebody, it's a little bit like, oh, I wonder if there's this, should it be 3 points or 5 points? You'll feel that out as you get a chance to look at these applications and determine kind of what sounds like a appropriate level of points for those kinds of questions. And just know, we're all doing our best. Nobody's expected to, be the perfect scorer. We're all going to have our perspectives. And that's one reason why we have, in situations where people feel unsure about what's going on with something, we have that extra check of somebody who can kind of do an extra review on things if we need it. Yeah, go ahead.
Rachel, can I ask a question?
Yep.
So what does training participation mean? Does that mean the people who work at the service provider are being trained, or does that mean that the clients that they're seeing are doing training to maximize their income or whatever?
This particular question is about the training that employees engaged in.
Okay. Okay.
And I think I need to correct that date, Kristen, but yeah, it's about the training of their staff.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have questions? Okay. So then there are, of course, like I said, penalties. So as far as I know, and looking at the application submissions on JotForm and the timestamps on those, nobody was late. So we should be fine on late applications. We do at this time have somebody who has not submitted an IRPA, but that's a question for another day. We won't discuss that today. They would definitely be getting minus 10 points for a late application if they submitted at this point. And then, of course, those substantial deficiencies. So we can talk a little bit more about what that would look like. But certainly, like I said, if you go through the application and in sections where there provided a space to provide the rationale and there isn't anything, if they're not meeting threshold, but then they don't say anything about it, that's concerning. If they're asked to attach documents, and you'll see how you can see that there are attachments at the end, and you look and there's nothing there, I would certainly, make a note of those things and suggest to you that that's missing items, missing data in the application, skipping questions, would be a substantial deficiency and something that we would want to, be penalizing. Okay, so let's just take a look at an application so you have a sense to see what they look like. I think they're fairly easy to read. Everybody's a little different in their preferences, but I've certainly seen harder to look at stuff. Oh, and that was not the right one. I wanted this. There it is. Okay. Ooh, that's tiny font. I don't think you want to look at that. And I apologize, we're looking at somebody but I think many of you know Jordan. But anyway, this is an application from Housing Opportunities. I'm not gonna, we're not gonna live score this, but as you can see, there's information here that would allow you to provide everything that you could see, and we can flip back to if you want to on the score sheet. You don't have, obviously we're not asking you to put all of this into the score sheet, but the name of the agency and the name of the project, we do ask you to put that in. You're going to see then almost, I think this is, the first couple of pages are pretty similar in that, almost all of the first pages have all this information on one page. As you get later into the application, you may realize that with narrative, it pushes some things onto certain pages, but for the most part, a lot of these are at the beginning pretty similar. So then you're going to have this very clearly, it's very easy to read. Did they do this? Did they do that? Scrolling down. And again, you're going to have those detailed instructions, which I'll show you again in a moment, for you to compare those answers and say, yes, they met the requirements, or no, they did not. Scrolling down. So this is going to be one thing we're going to see pretty consistently as we get into the latter part of the threshold requirements. A lot of folks were not monitored because of COVID, and that's okay. So we just want to make sure again that they're answering this question and not just skipping it, because we need people to be paying attention and answering the questions on the application. Scrolling down here again, all of these are those threshold requirements until you get to the end. And you'll see here right before you get to the coordinated entry section that here's their space for them to provide a rationale for their unmet threshold. So in this case, Jordan or whoever filled this out said they didn't have anything because they met thresholds according to what they responded to. So something that may require additional review or you may be confused about is if they were not meeting threshold above and then they put NA here. So that would probably be just a signal to us to say, like, there's something in the way they applied for this. They maybe made a mistake. So doesn't necessarily mean that they're substantially deficient, but maybe just making a note of that in your notes to say this was weird. And then we can kind of follow up and check to make sure, like, oh yeah, we actually, we know that those answers are correct on the IHCDA side of things. And they just accidentally put yes when they should have put no, or vice versa. Then you have your coordinated entry, and again, you'll see in the detailed instructions what the expectations are for percentages in order to score certain points there. And for Housing First, the Housing First is more similar in the score sheet and in the detailed instructions to the threshold. They're yes or no questions. So you'll see, did they, yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And if they did, then they get the points, or they didn't, then they would just be missing a point. So it's not an all or nothing, but it's did they say yes when they were supposed to, or no when they were supposed to, and then they get the point. All right. Then we get into the section on performance measures. Before I dive into those, does anybody have questions about those first 4 sections? Okay. Unless somebody's having trouble getting off mute, I'm going to assume we're okay. Okay, so you're going to see here in the performance measure section, this looks a little bit intimidating. I don't blame you for thinking it looks intimidating, but we're not asking you to, check their math. What I will say is that as we have been reviewing these, and Jenna, I'm going to kind of turn to you just for a second here on those questions where this was possible. There were a couple of folks who accidentally deleted the formulas that were pre-built inside of the spreadsheets. So if you come across that, and the spreadsheets are weird and they don't make sense, I think for the most part, it's either that they rewrote over it and it's okay, or they did something completely wrong. So you're either going to see that it's completely wrong or that they actually came up with a percentage in the end. We are going to ask that in some of these cases that you check the math. Jenna, is this question one of the ones that we are going to have an issue with, or do you have written down which ones do? And I apologize for putting you on the spot right now. Mm-mm. Oh no, I think we lost Jenna. Okay, well, I will follow up and let you guys know if we have some things that are not working. But my guess is that this one is fine because I think it was one of the later ones that we had the issues with. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Again, you're going to see that people have the opportunity to have their percentage here, and that the percentages, as I flip over into the other sheet, are either going to align with the scoring criteria or not. And if they aren't looking like the scoring criteria, then that would be a cue to you to make a note of that and have somebody else take a look at it. The households, this question here is one that I did want to make note of. So you're going to see here, this is question 3, households that exit to unknown, households that exit to unknown. Then in question 4, households who maintain or increased income, households who maintain or increased income. By accident, we did not change the language here. So what I'm going to say here is that if you notice, this should be this question. If you notice that this percentage is the same as the one up here, then make a note of that on the application, and that'll cue us to take a look at the data in the APR. This was one of the ones that I knew we had a problem with. The rest of them here are very similar to what we talked about before. Again, you're going to have like a little box for all of that to fit in. And what I would just recommend is that the box here, check it that it matches the chart. And if it doesn't, again, make a note that there is some sort of calculation error going on. We're hopeful that people followed the instructions correctly. As far as I know, we've only found 1 or 2 applications where somebody accidentally wrote over the formula. So if you see that something's wonky, you can put that note in and we'll take a look at it. Question 7, you're going to see here, and again, this, I'll show you the detailed instructions. Somebody's either going to answer yes or no here or yes or no here. They're not going to be yeses and nos in both boxes because people are either a direct HUD recipient or an IHCDA recipient. And then your bonus questions, a chance for them to describe their training, a chance for them to then describe their narrative about COVID-19, and then the application at the end will show you their attachments. So fairly easy to read. You're probably going to receive most of these all in one file or in a couple of files as opposed to each individual application. It's just easier for us to export that way from the system. But if you're having trouble getting the file to open or receiving the file, we'll make that adjustment. So real quickly then, I want to move into the detail instructions. Any questions before we move into the detail instructions? Okay. So I kind of gave you a little preview of this before, but again, the yeses and nos for the eligibility are here. The general information was that stuff at the top with name and location and things like that. So not necessary for you to make any record here. And you're going to use that score sheet to record your answers. It's just going to be that the details are here so that we could keep the score sheet pretty clean, so that we can get that data off it really easily. As you move again now down the page, you'll see that coordinated entry is there. Let me go ahead and view this at a little closer. You'll see the coordinated entry questions, and then here's your criteria for how many points people would get. So if they say 100 on their application, they'd get 10 points, anywhere from 90 to 99, 5, below 90, 0. Same thing with the other criteria. You'll see, what did they respond with their percentage, and that will indicate to you what the number of points they should receive is. Here's your housing first questions. Again, I highlighted when the questions were yeses in this case, just because the yes to me automatically indicates like, oh, yes, I get a point. And in this case, I highlighted the yeses when they were 0 points so that it would cue you to be like, oh, don't just be looking for yeses. Count the no's in some of these cases. Like I kind of talked about, if as you're reading through these, you'll kind of see in it, I hope, the philosophy of housing first and what we're talking about. That's why I wanted to provide some of that context there when we were talking earlier, so you kind of knew why we were asking these kinds of questions. And then I will let you know there is like a total tally, and some people put like a percentage instead of a number of points there at the end. Just count them yourself. You don't worry about whatever they tallied themselves. Count the yeses or nos. Count whatever's supposed to get points. You're on your own. You don't need to check it against what they put in. We've noticed that just a couple of people have accidentally counted wrong, so it's just easier to just count ourselves. Um, and then this next section on performance measures, very similar to the earlier section where we're indicating to you when somebody should be scoring full points, half points, or no points. The way that this criteria is set up, there isn't an option for you to give somebody like 7 points or 4 points. So it's either that they're hitting these, they're 95 or above, they're 90 to 94, they're, below 90, 89 or lower. The remaining questions are all listed here, and you'll notice in some cases, different project criteria have different expectations. So one of the things you're just gonna wanna make sure you do, if as you get to this section, you're not sure, you can go back to the beginning of the application, and it should indicate to you the type of program that it is right here in program type, permanent supportive housing. So if it's PSH, then you're going to be looking at the criteria for PSH. If it is RRH or TH to RRH, again, that would be indicated in that program type box. You would be looking for those percentages. I made a note of this here just because this was one of the ones where we had an issue with the question wording. So, I would use the percentage in the chart or the calculation in the chart. And, if it is the same as what's in the box below it, that's great. But we did notice that in some cases, when there was this wording issue, people went back to like 3 questions above and put that number in again in the actual box. So there's the calculation in the chart, which should be correct, or there's that number in the box. And if they happen to not match, go with what's in the chart because the box, they might have pulled a number from an earlier section of the application. Um, all right, so then as we get into compliance with requirements, again, I just want to highlight that people will either be answering in the top box or the lower box. I called them option A or option B. You'll remember in this application how that looked was that it was like one big box that was split in half, and his answer was only on the bottom half. So it'll be either a yes here or a yes here that you'd be looking for, not a yes in both boxes. Finally, just again, checking in on those bonus questions had questions about earlier. So this is training for adults, and we need to change this year. I didn't realize that was old. Did folks attend trainings? Did they participate in activities with HUD or with IHCDA? And then they have a chance to provide some information about that training. And really it's about saying, did they hit all 4 of these criteria? Did they hit 3 of 4, 2 of 4, or 0, 2 of them? And if they hit fewer than 2, then they get 0 points. Compliance, again, yes to all, they get 5, and so on down the line. And those are all specified questions in this section. So you'll see, did they say yes? Okay, then they get them all. If they say yes, then they get them all. So it's really easy to check. And then this is where you might have a little bit more of subjective criteria. So just want to give just a second to this and say that in the application, you'll notice that they have space to talk about how they responded to COVID and how they supported the pandemic response in their community. This top part is really about how might we, give people some grace about what happened during COVID. You know, we had a lot of staff turnover. We had issues engaging landlords. So maybe our data doesn't really show the story of what was happening in our project. It looks like we were performing poorly, but really it was just the circumstances of COVID that were impacting our performance. This year, it could be fairly, fairly subjective. Maybe some folks would give everybody a 5, and other folks are gonna, decide to be a little bit more discerning about, whether or not everybody gets 5 points or not. And we leave that up to you, and understanding that this is a part of scoring things. And fortunately, it's only 5 points. It's okay. It's not the whole application. And then, how did they engage in the community to respond to the pandemic? Again, it is worth 5 points. So this total question here about COVID is worth 10. And you could use your best judgment in how you would indicate, oh, did somebody here, fully achieve 5 points or not? And in that total amount, determine whether or not they get that full amount of bonus points. So like I said, that penalty section at the end here, did they get that application in late? As far as we know, like I said, I checked, nobody's done that. And then did they have substantial deficiencies? So there is a little bit of a definition here if that is helpful to you. Multiple errors, information's not provided, inaccurate information is provided. So again, as you're looking through and scoring these, if you're seeing the data, and especially in that performance section, and it's just all over the place and you're really not confident about what you're seeing, again, make a note of that when you're sending it back to us. Say, I think I want somebody else to take a look at that. And we could determine, it could be that they just threw numbers in there. As far as I'm hearing of everybody who's participated in this process, people are, they're doing the work they should be doing in this. They're not making up numbers, but you never know. There could be a new person and they're like, nobody's going to check this, and might not take it seriously. So we don't want to give people a pass entirely, but we also recognize that we are operating a competition, and if you're not going to take it seriously, we got to hold you accountable to that. And if there's mistakes, then we need to check to make sure they are truly mistakes and not something else. But that we give people as much of the benefit of the doubt as we can through this process before we kind of take some action there on it. All right. Okay, so kind of to wrap us up here, wanted to just make sure we had time to answer any questions that people might have. Um, this is my first time engaging with this process. Every continuum of care does this differently. There's no guidelines from HUD that everybody has to do this the same way. But I think that, given the large number of projects that we have at the Balance of State COC, this is a really fair way of assessing, whether or not they're meeting criteria, aligning with our expectations, and is, a very fair way to establish what it takes to renew. So while there's certainly going to be some little tweaks that we need to make as we, kind of debrief from this for this year, we're going to use your feedback that you have through this process to hopefully make improvements and do that. And if there are things that you're running into that you're really having a hard time with, again, that's what we're here for, to reach back out to us. There are going to be some of us that are already scoring some of the applications. We know some of the ones that came in weird already. Like I was saying, like Jenna had done a really good job in checking quite a bit of things before we got to this point. So, some of those we're going to intentionally hold back. And then some of them we're going to save specifically for Howard to look at, because Howard, as our consultant on the NOFO, is really knowledgeable about our community, has been working with us a long time and working with this process for a long time. So he's really confident in his ability to kind of assess the weird situations. But we may have some that you get that are wonky for sure, and we're happy to take a look at those again, or have somebody else on the scoring crew do that, so that we feel good about the scoring that we're doing, and that we're assessing people fairly, and that we're meeting our timeline for getting this turned around. I'll open it up then for any other questions that we haven't gotten to. Hey, Beth.
This is Beth White. Hi. I was wondering about confidentiality of this process and whether or not there is some requirement that who we score or how we're scoring or what we're given to score is confidential or not, or is there something we have to sign, or how does all that work?
That's a really great question. So I can't just tell you on one level. I am assigning each reviewer a number so that it's sort of blind on our side of things, unless you find, some big problem with something. And even then, we'll do our best to kind of manage how that's discussed and talked about in groups, so that we're not saying like, "Well, Beth, man, she had big problems with X, Y, or Z." But I am wondering, Kristen, if there's any other expectation that you have set in the past around confidentiality, or if there's anything that to be considered there. I don't have experience.
Not per se, because most of this information is readily accessible. The one caveat on that is if you come across an application that you have some relationship with, we've done a pretty good job about non-conflicted, like most of you are non-conflicted, but if there is a project that you're like, ugh, I just have some conflict there, reach out to us and we'll assign it to somebody else.
And I will
So,
say, oh,
sorry. No, if
one other
someone
thing that
calls me, go ahead.
I hoped it was clear, but just in case, there shouldn't be any personally identifying information about clients in this application. And if for some reason somebody did put something like that in there, please let us know. But there shouldn't be anything that they could have done in any part of the application, unless in the narrative, they were like, Jenny Smith was a real big problem for us. It's hopefully clearing us of at least the client side of things.
So if someone calls me and says to me, which one are you scoring or who are you scoring? And is that information I'm supposed to disclose or not? Or it feels like it's weird, but I go a lot of places and see a lot of people, and I'm concerned that might be a question.
I would hope that they wouldn't do that. So yeah, if somebody does that, let us know. Just not to single out anybody, but to say that this has happened so that we can kind of deal with it. But yeah, if somebody would do that, I would not say, yeah, I'm scoring these projects.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And I guess I will say, we're the ones who are going to get the inquiries from it, especially our subrecipients who are like, either they're going to be upset with their score, or something, and we're the ones who are going to hear that. Hopefully you won't hear that.
Kristen, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, other than thank you so much for volunteering to do this. This is great that so many people have said that they want to participate and do this. It is one of the more important things that the COC board does. And in past years, we've had trouble finding people to do it. So I'm very excited that everybody has pitched in and wants to do this.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that, it is a part of how we rank projects, and it is a part of how we explain to HUD that we are being, engaging in a community-based process, that this isn't just, people, IHCDA and an ivory tower, checking or minusing, people. So it's great to have the engagement of board members, of committee members who are willing to take time and do this. All right. Anything else?
Just one last thing. So as you are doing it, we're always looking to improve the process, improve the questions, improve everything about this process, and also just streamline it. You know, the least intrusive for our subrecipients to do this so that they can just do it and get it done and not be so scared about it, because they are scared about it. But if you think of anything that could improve the process for next year, please let us know. This will be, once this is all done and we get past all the NOFOs, we will start thinking about next year and how we can make it better.
All
Have a
right.
great holiday, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. Bye.